check, 1, 2. And there you have it. That was a track by Will Rodriguez, aka REELSOUL. So we're about to just shoot over to the States. I'm hoping, Will, that you're on the line. Are you there, Will?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. You know, typically for live radio, you're going to get technical problems, and I've been sweating it in the background for the last half hour. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. How about yourself, man?
Yeah, a little bit stressed, but now that I've got you connected, I can relax now. Do you know what I'm saying? I can get into it.
Let's take it easy. Let's relax. It's all good, man. I'm on the line.
Absolutely. So listen, Will, you know, for the last I don't know what, 10, 15 years, I've been sort of monitoring your material along with a lot of other DJs, certainly in the UK, and I think what's really sort of captured our imagination and our trust in your productions is that you have a very, very particular style. For me, I like to call it R&B house, because you seem certainly, especially in your earlier work, you seem to be able to marry that the R&B sound, the R&B vocal sound, traditional R&B, not the commercialized mainstream thing that's been bastardized, whatever, but the true traditional stuff with house music. Where did that sound come about? Well, actually, firstly, where are you from?
I'm from Los Angeles, born and raised.
And what's it? So you're Hispanic, are you? Is that right?
Yeah, I come from a Hispanic background, but I'm pretty mixed up as well. You know, Yaqui Indian, Mexican, a little bit of Japanese,
cool,
and French and Spanish. And
from my understanding is that, like, your father, he was a great influence in you in terms of sort of music that he would play. He was an avid enthusiast of vinyl and what have you else. What sort of music was he into?
My dad liked everything from groups like Tower of Power, the Blackbirds, George Benson, Roy Ayers. He had this crazy side of disco to him. You know, he used to like Cerrone. He used to like Don Ray. Gino Social was one of his favorites. So that's where a lot of my inspiration came from, along with my mom as well. My mom exposed me to disco music at a young age, so I always liked Donna Summers and all that kind of stuff. Cheryl Lynn, Evelyn Champagne King. That was like when I was really, really young.
So basically, let's fast forward to the 90s now. Okay, house music is just emerging. You've got like the UK, we've jumped on board. Europeans have jumped on board. What was it about house music that sort of captured your imagination, captured your interest, and prompted you to want to A, DJ, and 2, produce?
I used to like a lot of the vocals on the house music, and I used to always have a thing for a 4/4 beat. And before I got into the real house music, I was into like Black Box, Delight, kind of more commercial stuff that they play on the radio. And my cousin Victor, the man who's responsible for getting me started as a DJ, he introduced me to this other side of house that was completely underground. And that's where I was exposed to records on New Groove, Strictly Rhythm, Nervous Records, early Todd Terry, Roger S., Masters at Work, of course, were a big influence on me as well.
And what about the Italian boys? I can remember labels like Irma and Calypso. Did you ever get a taste of that over there in the States?
Oh yeah, definitely. And once again, that was through my cousin. My cousin used to collect a lot of records on Calypso and Irma, and artists like Don Carlos. And it was a little bit more it was more mellow than the stuff that was coming out of New York, I guess, at the time, Chicago.
Right.
It was really deep, so that just left a lasting impression on me, and that's actually what gave me the deep side of me, to like kind of mellow music with a 4/4 beat.
I mean, to be honest with you, when you're talking about Nervous Records, and then you're talking about Don Carlos. Look, I remember that period myself.
Right.
You were pretty much exposed to some very high quality production material then, really. Let's face it.
Yeah, and then what makes it a little different for me is I was only 11 years old when I was getting exposed to all that stuff. Literally 11, 12 years old. And, my cousin would take me record shopping with him.
Okay.
And at the time, DJ Doc Martin was working at Prime Cut and Prime Cut Records, which was a big record store in Hollywood. And, every time my cousin would walk in, Doc would always have a nice stack of new stuff for him to listen to. So anything that was kind of mellow, deep, that would catch my cousin's attention, he would hand me the headphones, here, check this out. And I'd end up getting a copy for myself. So
Sure.
he's my cousin Victor is the one who really took me out there, because I was too young to go to parties or undergrounds and stuff like that back then. So I lived through all that through records and going to the record store and hearing what my cousin was buying.
Right. I mean, in terms of you've obviously developed an interest, a keen interest in good quality music. I'm keen. I know the listeners and the viewers are keen to see how that sort of transfer. I mean, because there's one thing to listen to great music. There's another thing to be able to go in and produce a whole new sort of aspect and a whole new outlook on soulful house, if that's what we want to call it. How did you derive your sound?
As far as production wise,
yeah. I mean, what?
I would always make, even before I started recording stuff professionally and I had a setup, I was a strange kid that would get 2 cassette decks, 1 keyboard. At the time, I had a mixer that had a 4-second sampler.
Right.
So I would just kind of loop, empty house beats, little breakdowns of certain songs that were just beats by themselves. And I would kind of play along with it, record myself, and play that back on a cassette deck, and then just overdub myself. So I did that for years and years and years. And what influenced me to do that kind of stuff too was listening to certain songs like Crystal Waters, Gypsy Woman, Soul to Soul. I was a huge fan of Soul to Soul when I was a kid, and I used to replicate those songs. I used to try to recreate those songs and learn how to play them. So that's what kind of gave me once I started doing music professionally, that's what started me to. That was an influence,
Sure.
the soulful sound. That was an influence to me.
So you grew up in LA, and you've got the whole Nervous and Strictly sort of emotive. I would imagine Bottom Line, all those type of labels. Would have been certainly in sort of doing the rounds in the underground. And I remember one particular producer that certainly caught my attention was Frankie Feliciano. Now, you actually had an affiliation with him in your early production years. How did that come about?
I did a song with a friend of mine, David. He goes by Damon. And we recorded this song called Take Me to a Place. And we made it on Fruity Loops, the little program called Fruity Loops.
You're joking. You're joking.
Yeah, no, I wish I was. But I made it on Fruity Loops. And Frankie just happened to be in town, and he was playing at Marcus Wyatt's Deep Night.
Right.
And I just gave Frankie, I just gave it to him to have it. I wasn't trying to get it signed or anything. I just gave it to him to see if he liked it. And about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from Frankie, and he's like, "Hey, what are you going to do with this song you gave me? Is it signed yet?" So I said, "No, it's not signed." And he said, "Well, would you like me to put it out on Reconstruction?" I mean, I literally almost got a heart attack. I couldn't believe that he wanted to sign it. So I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And it was done kind of dirty, you know what I'm saying? So I said, "Let me go get studio time somewhere, and we'll re-record it. And we'll record it the right way." So with that being done, obviously we get Frankie the acapella, and he put out our version, but he got, at the time, the Fanatics Aaron Ross and Neil Pearce.
Ah, yes, the UK boys,
do
yes.
a remix. Yeah, he got them to do a remix on the flip, and that's where everything kind of took off for me, you know. But I have to thank Frankie Feliciano for that, because he's the one that gave me the time of day, you know.
For sure, for sure. So this literally propelled you pretty much into the limelight. You mentioned the work that you did with the Fanatics, and the exposure that you got from Aaron Ross, who, correct me if I'm wrong, he was working for the BBC Radio 1, doing a house show then.
Yep.
Amazing.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So I would imagine at that time then you are now, because you started, so I think you got hooked up with a Canadian label, is that right?
Right, yeah. A little bit after that single, after it dropped, about 2 or 3 months after that, I started getting hit up from Junior Palmer, who ran home recordings in Canada.
Right.
And it was almost like I can't say I was an in-house remixer, but it was almost like I was an in-house remixer, because, you know, he had me remix, you know, track after track after track, you know, including Tanya Renee, Falling. There's another record by Brett Johnson, Change. There was another record from Quentin Harris featuring Robert Owens called Always. So once I started doing all that work for home recordings, that's when I started getting phone calls from everyone else and working with labels like MN2S and Cameo Music, just random labels, you know, who were starting to call me for work, for remix work.
Now, so you mentioned home recordings. Quentin. You mentioned also Quentin Harris, who I think the flavour of that label was very much that traditional R&B sounding. So you're working with those guys, and then you're also, and clearly doing remixes. Do you think it was the work with them that sort of fashioned the style that we now know to be that real soul style, if you like?
Yeah, I would say so, because a lot of the vocals that Junior Palmer would give me, you know, let's say out of 10 vocals, you know, 3 of them or 4 of them were originally R&B demos that he picked up, you know, including Fallin', including another one by Tanya Renee called Off My Mind. Those were, you know, 90-something, 96 BPM R&B tracks. But he never released the R&B versions. He would have us do house remixes, and you know, then he would put them out on 12-inch and MP3 at the time. You know, those are the early days of TrackSource.
Right, absolutely, and certainly with the help of TrackSource to aid that exposure, your style pretty much got coverage the world over. Did that surprise you? Did it surprise you that suddenly, you know, everyone's calling for REELSOUL? In fact, I do remember Louis Vega actually doing a remix off the back of a mix, doing an additional mix off the back of a remix that you did of a well-known track. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, that was somebody that I used to know from Gautier, and I had did my remix of it, and you know, I gave it to Louis, and Louis was playing it, you know, for about 4 weeks on BLS on Roots Radio, and you know, one night my friend called me and said, "Hey man, put on BLS, you know, you could hear it online. Louis playing your remix right now." So I'm listening to it, and all of a sudden my version is fading out, and all of a sudden I hear this kind of Elements of Lifestyle, you know, like a DJ tool, you know. It was the same groove as mine, but he obviously did the drums, he did the bass line, he did the keyboards on it, and he totally replicated what I did, and he did it as a tool to get out of my mix. So when I heard that, I was blown away. I couldn't believe that somebody like Louis Vega would do that. I was just honored. I was so honored to hear that, you know, especially on New York radio, on an FM radio station. That just blew my mind. So I called up my partner, Mr. V, and I said, "Hey man," I go, what's this other version?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, man, Louis did his own version, you know, to kind of get out of yours." He's like, "Yeah, he played it last week at Cielo at Roots." So it blew my mind. It was such an honor, you know.
So I know also that you've worked with vocalists like Stephanie Cook, who's, in fact, actually, Stephanie just messaged me before the show. She's actually listening in, I guess. You better say some good things about her.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, you worked with Stephanie Cook, and you mentioned also Mr. V. Just tell us briefly how the Mr. V hookup came about.
Well, when I first got started, Alex Alvarez came to my house. He had a gig out here in LA, and he came to my house, and he wanted to hang out. He wanted to kind of work and do some music. And so when he went back to New York, he had a talk with V. I had already been in touch with Vic as well, because I was really loving his online mixes he would put up, and I met him at Deep as well.
Sure.
So sure enough, Alex went back home, and they called me and they were like, "Hey man, do you want to be down with Soul Channel?" I said, "Oh, I sure do. I would love to." So that's how our relationship started. Me and Mr. V and the whole Soul Channel thing. And V just took me under his wing, and he got me gigs in Europe, and I kind of became somewhat of his right-hand man at the time. For keyboard work. He flew me to New York to be part of his band when he came out with his Welcome Home album. And, we performed at Cielo, and, with Gene Perez on bass, and,
amazing.
Alex on keyboards, myself on keyboards.
Amazing.
This gentleman named Gerard, who was an awesome drummer. It was just a great experience to be taken under his wing like that, and to get more exposure.
So basically, you guys were almost like a live house outfit, really, weren't you? I mean, you could have gone live with that. Okay, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. Look, I've had the privilege of speaking to Richard Earnshaw on the show, and also to DeMarcus Lewis, and I've wanted to get their take on this whole soulful house resurgence. I call it a resurgence because for a while things were looking pretty bleak. Other forms of music that, dare I say, weren't as musical seemed to gain popularity, but suddenly, real soulful house, mind the pun, excuse the pun, has now sort of come to the fore. And we're finding that certainly the new generation now coming through, they're really starting to appreciate this sort of stuff. You got signed to Spen's Quantize label, and suddenly you're producing a lot more material. How did you see that transition when things were going really badly, or certainly not so good? Go on.
I didn't really let that bother me. I just kept going. I kept going, and I also try to do some techie style, tracks, and it didn't seem to agree with the people that were used to what I was making.
Right.
So I mean, I never stopped. I never stopped doing soulful house, but there was a point in time where everything got really techie. And believe me, I love the techie sound too, but I can't hear that all night. I love to incorporate it. If I'm playing for 2 hours, I like to build it up to that maybe, and then kind of bring it back down, go into some classics. But the whole soulful house is dead thing back then, it didn't really bother me. It didn't affect me. I just kept doing me because that's what my fans wanted to hear.
Right.
So.
And
yeah, I just kept writing it out,
Sure. And when did you see sort of the breakthrough? Was there a particular? I mean, I can identify certain tracks from where I am here in Australia that certainly seemed to sort of herald this resurgence. There was tracks from yourself, Stephanie, Richard, Mr. V, Louis Vega, that all seemed to happen at that certain time. Was there something that you felt you did, or a particular period when you felt, right, okay, we're back again?
Honestly, it was last summer. It was last summer when I started getting really busy. I started doing, working with Daryl James.
Right.
I started working with DJ Spin. You know, so I want to say last summer for me personally, everything kind of picked up. I got motivated again, you know.
Right.
And just didn't stop working. Just kept it going strong.
You know, anyone who's ever who's ever seen your Facebook posts, which I love, where you're in the studio, and they can actually see you putting a chord progression together against a particular soulful house production. They can see the soul and the vibe that you put into it, and it also shows very, very clearly that soulful house is really music of the soul. It's music from people who have very much musical inclinations, as opposed to just sort of hard, technical production inclinations. Is that where you see yourself? You see yourself as much more of a vibe person as opposed to being more technical?
Yeah, it's about a vibe for me because one, a lot of people don't know that I've never took a music lesson in my life.
Oh, seriously?
Everything that I've learned. I mean, I did go to a music school when I was maybe 11 or 10, maybe 10 or 9. But all I remember was the 5-finger exercise. And that was the dun 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 dun. You know,
right?
That's all I remember.
Well, you've come a long way since then, I can assure you. Yeah.
Yeah, but and I probably went to the school for about maybe a couple of months. But it's from the soul. It's from growing up listening to songs like Roy Ayers' Searching,
right.
Soul to Soul, Keep on Moving, Loose Ends, Hanging on a String.
Yeah.
Even hip hop, even the jazzy hip hop that was coming out of New York, like Tribe Called Quest, Gangstar, Brand Nubian, and the samples that they were using. Like, for instance, there was a song from Brand Nubian called "Love Me or Leave Me Alone."
Oh yeah, I remember
the original
that.
Sample was from. It was from. The original sample was from. It was a song called "San Francisco Lights" by Bobby Humphries.
That's
and
right.
I mean, I would put the record on just that little intro, and then bring it right back as soon as it would change.
Wow.
It's just little stuff like that,
How do you see?
Little. I'm sorry, goes that?
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you see the scene moving? I mean, there's. I'm really pleased with the resurgence that I can see in the UK and in the States, and working very hard to try and get something going on here in Australia. But and then sort of looking forward to 5, maybe sort of 10 years, where do you see the scene going? Do you see it sort of developing even further, or do you see yourself sort of branching maybe into doing other things? What's your take on that?
I honestly think the scene in general with the soulful thing, it's actually, I feel like it's on the borderline of crossing over to mainstream again.
Right.
Just like it was in the 90s when you had CeCe Peniston and Jamanda and all that stuff on the radio. You had all those Steve Silk Hurley remixes that were getting regular airplay back in the days. Okay. I kind of see that happening again because, you're hearing songs from Chris Brown, from Rihanna, and they still have that modern radio edge today, but they also there's something about it that's influenced, with soulful chords, and they're bringing back the soulful chord progressions and stuff back into that music,
You know what? It brings me on nicely, actually, just before we wrap things up, to talking about the project that you did with Sheila Ford, La Costa.
Oh yeah.
And actually, when I heard that, I thought, right, okay, this looks like a tactical move to try and get a soulful house track crossed over into mainstream. Was that the way it happened, or was it just something that happened organically?
That happened because, surprisingly, I never heard the original Natalie Cole version. And, I was DJing in the Bay Area for New Year's Eve with Mr. B. And me and my wife were driving back home, and we caught Christy Lomax, who's another good friend of mine. She has a radio show out here on 90.7 on Fridays. And Christy Lomax, Natalie Cole passed away. Me and my wife were literally, we're halfway home when we heard, the radio. We're listening to the radio, and the radio said, yeah, we just got word that Miss Natalie Cole passed away. And so I was devastated by that.
Sure.
And, as we got, it's a 6-hour drive from the Bay Area to Los Angeles. So by the time we got to LA, it was perfect timing to catch Christy Lomax on that Friday, because New Year's Day was on a Friday when that happened. And so, she obviously paid tribute to Natalie Cole, and she played Mr. Melody.
Right.
She played the Blue Blackness, the Alan Smitty, the bootleg.
Yep.
So Tell Me All About It. She played that. So when I got home, I kind of started, listening to other Natalie Cole songs, and I discovered La Costa. So, I mean, it was such a hard record to drop a house beat over, because it modulates.
Are you serious? Really?
Yeah, the original La Costa from Natalie Cole, it modulates. It doesn't stay on one count. It goes all over the place. So what I did is I downloaded that. I downloaded it off iTunes just to hear it, and I tried to drop it over a house beat. I have a Tractor controller, and I looped the beat just to see if it'll stay on beat.
Right.
I looped the house beat, and I put La Costa on the headphones, and it just went all over the place. So I was so determined to remix that just for personal use and to give it to a few heads. And I literally had to make it in sections, from the intro. What I did is I put the master tempo on the pitch control.
Right.
So if I'm moving the pitch up and down, it wouldn't change the pitch of her. It would just change the BPM. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I literally had to ride it with the pitch controller, and I had to record that in sections. And once I got, the intro, the first verse, the chorus, the second verse, the chorus, I had to literally record each individual part like that, riding the pitch control to a beat that was already 125 on the headphones. So it was very complicated, but I got it done in about an hour. So once I was finished,
wow.
Yeah, literally an hour. I mean, I was so determined to make it happen. So I went ahead and opened Logic, and I just threw the metronome on Logic at 125 BPM, and all the parts that I just recorded, they were already pretty much on time because I recorded them like that, So I had to piece it all together once again. The puzzle was taken all apart, and I had to put the puzzle back together again. And this time, everything was on count because of the way I recorded everything in sections of the original La Costa track.
Sure.
So then I went ahead and programmed those beats and added a bass line and kind of did little minimal keyboards. I added some pianos and strings to it, and that's it. And I gave it away to a few people, and I found out that I gave it to Louis Vega. Louis Vega definitely played it. He played it a lot. And shortly after that, I was in talk with Spin. And, Spin said, hey, man, how about if we get Sheila Ford to redo it? Can you send me the parts that you already have, minus the original Natalie Cole track? I said, yeah, no problem. So I went ahead and converted the whole project and sent it to Spin. And Spin, Gary Hudges, they all did the rest. They added some complicated piano progressions on there. They filled it up. They really filled it up for me. And they got Sheila Ford to do the vocals, and the rest is history, And it turns out that that record actually got airplay on UK radio, and it was on regular rotation. It wasn't just mix shows that were playing it. It actually got Spin sent me a little stats of how many times it got played, and it did get some love in the UK. It really did. It got some radio play.
I mean, certainly even over here, I know a few DJs over here played it. I was sort of, backing it. I was actually in contact with Sheila, when just before it got released, because just like the guys in the UK, you could see that the track has crossover potential, and the weeks following from today, there'll be It'll be very interesting to see how that progresses, you know. But you know, it's
Right.
for me that track is synonymous with, as I say, the new wave that's coming through, and it's, you know, it's a real pleasure to have you know, your music and the rest of the other producers and DJs who are working extremely hard behind the scene. And if we can get things sorted out, we would definitely love to have you here in Australia, and certainly we would like to have Mr. V and Quentin Harris and those guys even here on the House Junkies network, because that's what we do. We're not just about playing music, we're also about promoting artists and projects and what have you. So, Mr. William Real Soul Rodriguez, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and I know you're a very, very busy man, very difficult to get hold of as well. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure I'll be speaking to you very, very shortly.
Oh, definitely, man. Anytime you need me for anything, you hear a new track, something that you need, you just holler at me. You got my information.
I will hold you to that, brother. I will hold you to that for sure. You know. Well, listen. Have a good. I believe it's a good night for you guys over there now.
Actually, it's 1:22 p.m. right now in the afternoon.
In the afternoon. Okay. Listen. Enjoy the rest of your day. I will be in touch with you shortly after this show. Okay. Take care. Have a good day.
Can I give a couple of shout outs?
Man, you go for it. You go for it.
Don't do that. I just want to thank, I want to shout out to Daryl James, DJ Spinner, Mr. V, Christy Lomax, Marcus Wyatt, Craig from Texas, all my family. Everybody, DJ Spin, everybody that I've worked with, and everybody that's been a supporter of my music. I thank you and I love you from the bottom of my heart. And I appreciate everything that people have done for me, working with me, reaching out to me. It's been such an honor, and the journey's not over. It's kind of just getting started now, especially with my label going, So
absolutely,
there's a lot, and there's so much in store.
Good stuff.
Much in store to come.
That's what we want to hear. That's what we want to hear. Well, listen, on behalf of the House Junkies and everyone that you mentioned, we appreciate you. We'll keep up the good work, and we'll certainly be behind you 100%. Take care, brother.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much.
Yes, it is. So there you have it. There's a man himself, William Real Soul Rodriguez, a truly amazing producer. And you can hear from what he says about his past. He was literally a child from the early house scene. And, from the influences of the people around him, he managed to carve out what I feel is truly the natural progression for R&B, which is R&B with house. Some people like to call it soulful house, whatever. Some people don't even like to call it a name. Look, it's all good. For me, I'm just loving the fact that good music is now cool. Okay? So, certainly on behalf of all the House Junkies, we're going to be promoting, the best underground house music, and through these video channels and what have you, we're going to try and push and showcase artists as much as we like. So, from what I can see, there's another 35 minutes left of the show, so I'm going to be getting back into more Real Soul material, kicking off with the track that he talks so much about, Off My Mind. See you on the other side.